if we actually have the courage to be able to role model what it is okay to be able to go to therapy. There's a crazy stat out there. 57% of men go to therapy one time and then they say they're done. It's like, I don't know how to sit here. This isn't a mechanic. They're telling me that they can't fix me. You telling me I'm supposed to be the one doing this shit? Oh,
Like, what am I
second,
here for?
I'm paying you money. I'm traveling here for you to tell me I need to fix my shit. Good morning. Today is March 12th. I have the pleasure of speaking to licensed mental health counselor, Jor-El. He is an author of 3 books, Mindful Meditations for Black Men, The Shadow Work Workbook, and Self-Care for Black Men. How you doing today?
Good. So just for context, first name is Jor-El.
Oh, my apologies.
All good. I always like to lead with, uh, I know because my last name is a Spanish last name, but first name is not because I'm named after Superman's father. And so, it's a comic book name through and through. So yeah, Jor-El.
So, which parent was the comic book person?
Definitely my dad. And so I always like to say that my dad is a comic book fan and my mother is apparently an understanding woman, and like she just rolled with it. So here we are.
So, did you actually get your dad's genes as far as being like, "Hey, I really like comic books," and then I had my mom's of just understanding?
No. Um I never got into comics really. I do enjoy superhero content, movies, etc., but I just never got into comics for some reason. Every once in a while I debate the idea of like, oh, do I want to read them like as a hobby a bit now? But there's so much to catch up on. The lore, especially Superman lore, is just like so deep. Like it would take me years. So I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I'll just do a quick plug. So, my brother just started putting out his own comic books, and the one was called September Paradox, and the other one's called The Devil's Box. And September Paradox is, see, I looked at your back; it has New York in there. It's
Mhm.
remember September 11th, where a person like how people lost so many of their families and how many people have been mentally devastated from the traumas of losing people so quickly. And not only was it taken from them, but how society kind of was so overwhelmed that nobody really had the possibility of process. And it had this one dude that was able to go back in time to try to save his girl, but perceives to be crazy. It's really awesome.
It sounds great.
But so I want to jump straight into it. Um, And the question I asked you right before we started, what is the difference between how we would treat mental health towards a black man compared to a white man? And how does the intersectionalities create these barriers or opportunities to help people?
Yeah, it's a really rich question, right? Because especially when I think about it in terms of we can't talk about men's mental health without an understanding of masculinity, right? And sort of like how we define manhood, maleness, etc. And so much of that is culturally defined, right? And so what I find really interesting is sort of like the differences between maybe white men clients I may work with and black men clients that I may work with is how like culture, even if they're both American, right? There are
Hmm.
very different experiences in terms of how culture may define masculinity, manhood, and fatherhood. So there's some differences, right? I think there is this sort of general expectation for men of moving towards this space that's like a bit more stoic, like emotionally unexpressive in large part. You sort of keep things to yourself, you're independent, etc. And so that I think sort of transcends maybe race in this country in large ways. But then you also have to think about like the construction of black masculinity, especially in like post Civil War era, and how we've come to understand blackness, right? And so we think about what the legacy of, you know, um, literally ripping families apart
Hmm.
does for the construction of a family, right? And so you have this like Black people in America, especially, and in other areas, have this historical legacy of like really actually placing Black folks and Black families in these unimaginable circumstances, in
Mhm,
where you know Black women are separated in this particular way from Black men, and what that sort of teaches people and has taught people, Black men especially, about how they're supposed to contribute to a family and what their value is. And so, one of the things I talk to some Black men about often is this idea of an over identification with our bodies, right? And so, because it's part of this sort of intergenerational legacy, which is your value is your body.
mhm.
At one point, it literally was like how big you were, how strong you were, your ability to withstand trauma was your value, right? Your ability to reproduce was your value. And so I think that impacts how Black men see masculinity in ways that it doesn't necessarily affect white men, right? And so part of it is sort of understanding the impact of those things and how that informs how we see ourselves. Of like, okay, um, yes, every man, especially in the West, sort of thinks about wanting to provide for the people he loves and cares about. But how does that pressure manifest for a Black man versus a white man in terms of how you see yourself, how you see your ability to withstand maybe discrimination in the workplace and pretend that it doesn't impact you as much. It has to roll off your back, right? And whereas like maybe um, some white men in the same position may have a little bit more resource, if not themselves, maybe within their family or culturally, social capital to move differently in those spaces. And so, yeah, thinking about all those intersections, and even for within Black men as a population, how that differs from person to person based on your age, your region, and certain like those other cultural factors that come into play. Yeah.
You bring up such a good point about the separation between Black men and Black women and the war on crime of, and this is why I get stressed so much in my macro class, of creating the drug or the, prison sentence for crack cocaine compared to cocaine, and how they actually distorted it. But then we have actually created this separation of how little boys and little girls are raised a lot by single mothers. So then at this time, we're not able to understand what healthy masculinity is. When, and I'm not saying that women are not trying, they're doing their best job that they could provide it. But now you're talking about it from a historical stance of which you just said I'd never really put in the perspective of post-slavery or post-Civil War of how of a person would be sold based off of how physically they can be able to use as an attribute, and slowly trying to weed it as or water its way out of it. You don't it doesn't happen overnight, and then you still have those residuals from years ago. So, when you get a client, like and now they're struggling about their masculinity, what's some of the things that you talk to them about?
Mm. Well, that's a really good question, and I definitely want to answer that. But I also want to offer this sort of very contradicting point, because what's also interesting about the research on Black men, in particular, is that Black men are among the most involved in terms of fatherhood in America. They're the most heavily involved group by race and gender in America for fatherhood. And isn't that fascinating? Right? We have this stereotype of Black men are not around, and that's something that some far right people will sort of share and tout as a sort of political point. We talk about the stereotype of Black women as welfare queens and all this sort of stuff that we put out there. Not we, people put out there, right? And it's like all the while, the research is telling us, oh, Black men are the most involved fathers in America. So what's up, right? And it's just really interesting to think about, even with all those challenges, enslavement, Civil War, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, crack epidemic, and how all those things influence Black families. That Black men and Black families are still finding ways to be resilient in the face of those things, and in some cases doing better in on certain measures than other groups in the country. Fascinating stuff. Um, but yeah, I think when I am meeting with a black male client, I think a lot of it is starting with this foundation of giving them language and the connection to their bodies to understand their feelings, which I think that maybe other groups of people have a little bit more access to resource wise because there's still, many more white people maybe read leisurely about psychology, go to therapy more often, as a general kind of rule. This is getting much better, especially in the past 10 years, I would say.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think a lot of black men, and this is myself included, right? Like, I didn't grow up in a household where we were talking about the difference between like um, being angry and irritable, or and what that feels like in the body, right? Or being like sad and how that's different than depressed, or in and like mapping on my behavior to maybe some emotional experience, right? We weren't making those connections in my house, and that's I think certainly true, has been true for a lot of black men, in previous decades. And so a lot of it starts with this foundation of saying, okay, let's just understand and have language to talk about your experience in a way that maybe you've never been taught before. um, that in and of itself is an incredible intervention to be like, oh, now I understand for the future. This is what I'm feeling. This is what it feels like in my body. This is how I can communicate about it. And just think about all the wonderful ways in which that could trickle into someone's life in terms of getting support and accessing other resources. Yeah. So usually starting somewhere there for sure.
It's, I find it so interesting the way that you were just talking about it because there's, the family I grew up in, my father was a Vietnam vet, my grandfather's a World War II vet, my grandfather's a World War One vet. So when you pass it all down that information, you wanna go to the quickest obedience to compliance.
Huh.
And when you're going back to being able to identify the fractures of the emotions, instead of just going to angry, I'm frustrated, or I'm upset, or I'm annoyed, and going back to an emotion that is basically our control point, it actually really stifles us from being able to experience the present or being able to experience even the past. And what I've and this is something that was really interesting to me because I decided to go for my bachelor's degree. After I finished my bachelor's, I decided to take a trip to go skiing out in France. And this woman, she told me, she's like, "We haven't been at war since World War II, really. America has been at war pretty much except for 14 years, or is it 16 years of its whole life?
Huh.
And we never actually really took the time out to say, I feel." And as much jokes as that some people have said towards Gen Z has been this spearhead of show your fucking emotions. Heal.
Hmm.
It's okay.
Hmm. Yeah. And
And
I'll add,
go ahead.
sorry to interrupt, but like, I'm a millennial. Right, and so every so often you'll see these posts of millennials being like, "Bro, we've done this. This happened 2008. We had 9/11. We had Columbine. We had all." And I think just now, people are like, "I'm maybe not okay with all these things that have happened," and like, and are starting to understand how it's all shaped
Mhm,
our like collective mental health, right? And then obviously now, like we've had COVID, a 100-year incident
mhm,
that's a mass disabling event, and we still haven't even really begun to unpack how that influenced us individually and collectively. We've all just sort of moved on. So I think you make a really great point about like how we need space to be able to reflect and say, "Oh, what has happened, and what is that like for me?" Absolutely.
and then there was something that you were saying, and I really believe this is why I started up this podcast. It's very similar but different verbiage of we didn't grow up in a house where we were talking about psychology or the differences of emotion. Like, I did 2 tours over in Iraq with the Marine Corps, and you don't have time for the emotion, nor do you really actually have the ability to always even have the emotional and mental capacity to be able to understand what happened or even be able to break it down in verbiage. But if people have the courage to be able to use and this is why I interview people of all spectrums, is if we actually have the courage to be able to role model what it is okay to be able to go to therapy. Well, there's a crazy stat out there. 57% of men go to therapy one time and then they say they're done. And it's like, I don't know how to sit here. This isn't a mechanic. They're telling me that they can't fix me. What are you telling me? I'm supposed to be the one doing this shit? Hold on a
Like, what am I
second.
here for?
I'm paying you money. I'm traveling here for you to tell me I need to fix my shit. This is like, but we also don't talk about the return on investment of what healing looks like and how it changes your relationships, how it changes your relationship with self, or even changing your relationship with your surroundings.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully put.
So when they reached out and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I definitely would love to hear about a black man's perspective." And I just had the privilege of talking to a man that did doctorate of nursing, and he does actually a lot of ministry work, and he focuses on black men's mental health. And I'm like, we don't talk about the challenges as much. We'll just say men's mental health. My thing is normalizing men's mental health. If you want to tell me about Asian mental health, fucking let's do it. Let's have this conversation because we need to start talking and so we can start processing.
Mm, yeah, and I'd also offer, I think one of the things that comes up a lot in my work, um, this is with all men, but I think I've specifically sort of noticed in Black men this, this level of pressure,
Mhm,
um, I think, you know, with masculinity, there is that pressure to be a certain way, right? Of like all these messages that we've been told, this is how you're supposed to be, etc. But I think also with Black men, I think there is also this collective pressure based on the sort of history and the stereotype to say, okay, yes, you have all these pressures as a man, but also you are a black man and you will be seen as a black man. Therefore, you have to represent in a particular way to
mhm,
advance the status of black men, right, publicly. And so, like, how will people see you? How will people um, see your behavior in the workplace, see your, you know, role as a father? And so some of that pressure maybe is even good, right? It motivates, I think it's in part what motivates some black men to be like, I'm going to try therapy for the first time, or I'm going to read this self-help book, right? That may start to get my wheels turning in a new way. But it also can be very detrimental in that being able to see, have compassion for yourself in the ways that maybe you've quote unquote failed to meet this sort of unrealistic expectation of always having the answer, always advancing the public image of black men. It's like, well, no one can really do that, right? Because we're humans and imperfect. And so there are going to be moments where you don't do the best thing. There are going to be moments where maybe even not even by your own fault, you get laid off,
mhm.
right? And that's and so really helping men see that those moments, maybe they're not always personal failures, right? But they're sort of the manifestation of difficulties in a system. And so really starting to have compassion for the self when maybe you're not living up to this expectation that you think you're supposed to live up to. That's unrealistic.
And I love going back to the historical lens. If we didn't have people that were able to always explain everything to us, and we didn't have a person that was able to share this, then all of a sudden we say, behave this way, act this way. But, well, you have access to the internet, but I don't know where to look. I don't know what to actually, why to even ask these questions. And it's it's being willing and curious to be able to have people that role model this type of healing. Think about like for instance, they were talking about black students will do better if they have black elementary student teachers in there. And if you only have people that are white, you have this unconscious of the person that's actually feeling themselves, well, I need a white person to be able to explain this to me, but I don't know how to actually connect to them. they don't look like me. It looks like this whole power hierarchy, and it's very subconscious. So when I hear that, I think about like, how do we help role model this always on a larger scale?
Yeah. And I'll just say this about my own educational experience. I I don't recall having a black teacher. I'm struggling to think of a moment where even through high school. Actually, no. Now I'm thinking I had one math teacher, I think, in middle school, who was a black man, which was great. I mean, he wasn't the friendliest, nicest person, but he was effective, so good for him. But I think about that. It's interesting because, yes, that's right, right? That being able to have people who look like you offers you this connection and maybe an easier pathway. But I
Mhm,
think also sometimes where within community we get messed up is that
mhm,
because, like, so let's say for instance, I rarely had black teachers and I still did very well, right? So I think it would be easy for someone like me to say, oh, well, because I didn't need that and still did well, that like you should be able to be fine to do it and excel anyway. So if you're not excelling, something's wrong with you. It's not the institution, right? Which is so wrong, right? But the thing is, some people will exceed anyway, right? They have other protective factors, helpful, supportive factors in their lives. Some people will always be able to make it work where other people can't, right? And that's not just because of who they are as people. That's also the environment that they have around them, right? And so sometimes within community, we also fight against one another because of our proximity to success or even likeness.
mhm.
And some people really hold on to that very strongly because that's the one maybe access point of power, of relative power that they have. So they hold on to it very deeply. And they say, oh, well, I'm this kind of black person. And you're not that kind of black person. So you're not the good kind of black person. I'm the good kind of black person. Right. And it just, and talk about the deep psychology of the internalization of that racism, right? It's just so powerful that we still continue have to work through that as we continue to age and grow up.
Well, it's and I love how you broke it down where it's almost a rejection of the community if you do change. I've seen this with the Crow Reservation, the Lame Deer Reservation. I live in Montana now, and you'll see that with Native Americans where they call them apples. They're like, "Well, you're more of a white person. You're red on the outside, but white on the inside." And I'm not being racist. This is what they would call them. So I want to really illustrate that. But when it becomes hard, it's like because part of the healing and part of the changing, sometimes people will say you're outgrowing the community. Your relationship with them does start to change because you start getting rejected.
Mhm.
And if you start being able to heal, sometimes you can take people with you up to a certain step, up to a part of your journey. But then you gotta love them for being part of your journey, not rejecting them for not being with you the whole way.
Mm, mm, absolutely. And I'll say that for uh, you know, black folks in general, where let's say someone is going to therapy as an adult now, they're learning all these things, they're healing, and they're like, oh, some stuff in my family of origin is really messed up. And like,
Mhm,
actually, this thing that this person does is abusive. I need to have different boundaries with them. I need to like manage in a different way. And then they get the feedback of like, oh, so now who do you think you are now? You're doing blah, 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 right? And that distance happens and it's really difficult, I think, for people to navigate that moment because you're what people see as like moving away from maybe the culture or community. What it is actually is a desire to be fully immersed in the community, but healthier.
mhm,
It's like someone brave enough to say, actually, this thing that we've all been doing is not okay. We're
mhm,
hurting each other. How about we don't do that? Because I love you, because I want to be here. But it's so easy for people to go to the place of like, oh, you're and so in my growing up, there was like it's kind of a slur, but not really, I guess like a like an apple, but like Oreo,
Mm,
or like you're black on the outside, white on the inside if you talked a certain way,
mhm,
or you were Carlton from Fresh Prince versus like a Will, right? And Will was like what black was. Carlton was not really black, right? And so like having those conversations of no, like that's all of that is black, right? Speaking, if you're scholarly, that's still black because there are black scholars.
mhm.
If you're a softer guy who likes to talk about emotions, you're still a black man. You're just not this other kind of black man. That's okay because we all have access to that range of everything because we are everything. We have that access. And so that's a big part of what I like about my position and ability is to show up visibly in these ways and just even talking about emotionality online
Mhm.
and being like, yeah, we can feel your feelings. I love being on like a social media site. And like, I think someone posted recently, a friend of mine, that they were rewatching This Is Us. I don't know if you ever saw that show.
To
Um,
be honest, I have not had much time for TV between
okay.
full-time grad school and everything else. I'm just like, yeah, but go on, I'm listening.
Totally fine. It actually, you might want to watch it from like a psychology perspective and like social perspective. So good. But it's a family drama. Um, and from NBC a few years ago. And I had a friend who was talking about rewatching it. And I responded to their message public online, be like, yes. And it's a great show. And I literally cried at every episode, literally every episode. And just that, like, I do think about how much that is like a really small moment, but then I think of like, oh, who gets to see that? Who gets to see my face, my hair, my skin saying that publicly and just being like, this
Mhm.
is it and it's okay. Right. That makes a big difference in allowing us the ability to hold all the things that we are at the same time.
So, do you remember? So growing up, I grew up in the '80s. I'm a millennial as well, I'm 41. And when black people were pictured, it was like the movie Juice or Friday or and it had this racial tone of, "Hey, this is what black people are." And, well, then you will also hear people say, "Wow," and I've heard this too, is like, "That dude doesn't sound black, he sounds white." Or a white dude, and he sounds black, and I'm like, "How does a color sound? Help me understand this." You know what I mean? No, 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 no.
Mhm.
Please use your words. Help me understand. And
Yeah.
I will tell you, I pissed off a lot of people along the way because it's you don't always understand like how much of the racist shit that you're putting out into the world, and then you're asking for confirmation to be able to confirm your own biases, to be able to not look at a person, you look at the sections, the layers of the person to not be able to connect with them. And I it's very, very fascinating. And then you also said, looking at it from the psychological lens, it's movies have been ruined since I've been learning about psychology, like Groundhog's Day, existential psychology of how you really
Mm.
just live in just the same day over and over again. It's
Mhm.
like, oh Jesus, they've been telling you these messages for years. Like click, how many people want to just move through the life real fast and not even exist? And it's just like, huh, help me understand.
Yeah. Now imagine, so I've always been uh deeply sensitive and I think a bit existential. So I was like the 10-year-old kid that was like, so what we're saying is every day is so bad that you want to be able to do it over. What does that say about the life that you're living? Like that was me as like a 10-year-old. And so like, yes, I ended up in the right profession. Um, but yeah, it is really interesting. And I often use media sometimes in my work with clients to like help get at some of those deeper things, whether it's like shows or books, um, to explore like what is that really about? What are we really talking about here? Can you see something through that lens easier than if I were just to ask you directly about that thing because maybe that's just too hard to do.
To be fair with me, the more that I've been learning, so I actually had to read books typically by white men. And then when I started understanding their basis, their understanding, I was able to read books about white females and now actually changing the spectrum, or reading books by black men or black women, and actually being able to change the prism. But I also had to understand that I had this way of the way the language would connect with me. So I agree with that, and then it's like, how does that person connect? Well, we can't just say, "Here." So this a psychiatrist I just interviewed the other day, listening to a lifetime he is, listening for a lifetime. Like, I would not have been able to read his books if I never went through my bachelor's program,
Yeah.
and it's very interesting about where we don't actually realize that the building blocks of this type of connection. And to be truthful, I'm very appreciative of you as a black man showing your emotions to be able to help other black men, or even people that have the spectrum of high masculinity, where they're like, well, it's okay, you guys are sensitive. But actually, a person as a black male, they have that still stereotype of, hey, they're the exuberance of masculinity or that tough skin.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know. As I've gotten older personally, I really just want to reject that further. I'm like, no, not tough skin, soft skin, supple skin. I moisturize. I cut easily. Like I'm like, no, 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 no. I can be a big softie and things impact me. And I'm gonna try my best to let that show. Right. And that's still even a challenge for me, even knowing what I know, even knowing what I do for work, right? Because I still have this deep programming that, but you're not really supposed to do this,
Hmm.
right? So I have to nudge myself forward to do things sometimes to say, like, to tell a friend, this is how I'm really feeling. Instead of being
Hmm.
like, it could be better. I'm like, no, 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 no. I've been stressed about this for the past 3 days. I don't know what I'm doing. Do you have any advice for me? Do you just want to hang out? It'd be nice to see your face because I've just been in my head for, like being able to offer those things so readily because that's just human, right? And I think that's one thing I talk to black men a lot about is like, I think because of the history and because of the stereotyping, because of the hyper masculinity, like stereotype of it all, I always say, okay, but like you're a human though.
Hmm.
That's a figure that you're talking about, right? That's not real. That's a figure. You're a human being. Human beings
Hmm.
have feelings. Human beings get hurt. Human beings have thoughts that maybe sometimes are good, sometimes are very bad, right? You get to have all of that. And, um, yeah, how can we just create a relationship to all that stuff that's okay? Where you're just like, all right, this is a part of who I am. It doesn't make me divergent in all these ways that society tries to tell me.
Well, I'm looking at the time. I have you for about another 13 minutes, and you told me we have a hard stop. So I wanted to jump into first, before we get into the book that you just released. What prompted you to write the book, The Shadow Work? I told you, man, I love Carl Jung. I love the way that he spreads his message. So we're first going to take care of me and make sure that we wrap up with both with you too.
Yeah. So I think from my initial exposure to like I guess we want to call them maybe the godfathers of psychology and all this. Freud's cool. I mean, we're also problematic. I mean, but everyone was problematic in a lot of ways before. I mean, maybe even still, but certainly before like the middle of the century, last century. I always liked Jung because he had this. He had a little bit more of an esoteric spin, right? In which, he talked about shadows, the sort of like collective unconscious. And as someone who, like, I had a spiritual life and have always that, like, I connected to that idea of like, oh, these are things that also maybe are harder to describe and put a pulse on, but they are getting at something that I think we all might experience. And yeah, I like the idea of the shadow of like we all have this part of ourselves that is difficult to accept and hold. And the idea of being able to speak to that and introduce that maybe in a more mainstream context of, hey, this, let's say we all have this shadow part of ourselves, but also maybe learning to approach even that part of yourself with compassion, right, and acceptance could help relieve a lot of internal conflict that you're experiencing in your life. And so that also came, the book came about, the ideas also came about in the middle of the height of COVID,
Mm.
where people, a lot of us were starting to be like sitting at home, um, and really thinking about life very differently. And all of a sudden, you start to hear a lot of stories, or I started to hear a lot of stories of people saying, I don't think I like what I'm doing. Why am I doing this? I don't know if I like my partner, actually. Why am I here? And it's like, oh, because you weren't giving yourself the space to think about what you really wanted, probably because you see that as undesirable for some reason or wrong for some reason. Could that be stuff that's in your shadow? And so, yeah, I really wanted to give people like a practical way to start working through that that was less academic, um, but authoritative and hopefully warm enough to say, like, it's all good here. You're good here. Um, and we can just work through it in this little space. Yeah.
It's so I worked as a peer specialist for 3 years before this for the VA, and quite a bit of conversation would come up about, "Hey, how like, this monster I have this monster in me." And I and it took me a while when of my healing, I said, "What did your monster do for you? Why did you need to create that monster? And why are you scared to be friends with that monster? Because that monster is always going to be there. If you cut off parts of your body, that damn thing acts like a leech and comes back up and it follows you." And what was interesting about that conversations, they were like, "I never thought about that. I never thought about why am I not friends with my monster?"
Yeah. Great.
So, mindful meditations for Black men. What made you or what inspired you to read this or write this book? And how is it important for everybody to read this book? That'd be the second part of it.
Sure. Um, so in addition to Young and all that he's brought to my life, uh, I was exposed to mindfulness at also a pivotal part in my life after finishing undergrad, trying to find my way in the world, feeling anxious about the plans falling through, not really sure what I was going to do next. And, I came across the power of now. I think it's someone actually recommended it to me. And this idea of mindfulness was just really important for me. And I thought that like it was the first time I'd been exposed to that, sort of taking some courses in religion and spirituality. So meditation I was a bit more familiar with, but like the philosophy of mindfulness was less familiar. And I thought about, and so that's been a part of my life since then. And I thought that like maybe just like me, there were probably a lot of Black men who never really had been introduced to the concept of sort of like living or like a mindset that really allows us to be aware and tuned in to ourselves, to our environment, in this very intentional way, and how that could bring about so much relief and ease, as opposed to the sort of more common, I think, verbiage, which is, oh, just keep moving. If
Mhm.
you just move past it, it'll be fine. You'll be fine. It's like, well, are you really fine though? Is that working? Do you feel good? Do you feel at peace? Do you feel restful? Do you feel comfortable with yourself? And so, you know, mindful meditations for Black men came after. I actually did an audiobook before that that were actual guided meditations. Um, and so we wanted to sort of build out the content further and say, okay, let's make a full text that maybe addresses some of the themes that are prevalent for Black men and offer it through this mindfulness lens. And so I'm just really proud of being able to create these sort of things and to be able to have conversations like this that says, okay, like we get to have these conversations. it's good that we're having these conversations and talking about these things. And like my previous book, Self Care for Black Men came out a couple years ago. Um, I think it's really important. Actually, let me back up. I'll say I've found so much support from women who buy this book for their men in their lives. And so a lot of sort of like the early success of self-care for Black women was like mothers who like, my baby needs this. They need to be able to understand how to take care of themselves, right? And getting it from their partners and siblings. And so I think I've also heard that it helped them understand more clearly what Black men may be thinking about. Right. So just, as we are talking about earlier, if you've never had the language to be able to articulate, this is what this pressure is like. This is what I'm thinking about. This is the thing that keeps me up at night. I'm feeling more anxious than than I can say. And I don't even know if I'd use that word anxious. Right. Here you have this book that has all the verbiage, right? Of like, this is what's the kind of things that your person may be thinking about going through. And so that's why I think it's important for folks who aren't Black men themselves to read it. And actually, I had a friend who, that this is another angle that I didn't consider before he mentioned it, but I have a white friend who has um, Black biracial children. He has little boys. And he was like, I got the book because I need to understand what they may grow up thinking about more in the future and how they may see the world. And I was just like, I never thought of that, but that's beautiful. Right. And so that, now we also live in a world where families are so blended and that people have we do have more close relationships with people of different ethnicity and races, and being able to have meaningful connections and conversations about our internal lives. That's all in these books and things too.
Well, we got about 3 minutes left, and what is a message that you want people to hear from you? And where can they find you?
Um, I would say if there's a message that I could share with people is like there's a lot of information out there, especially geared towards men today, that is so hostile and aggressive. And I'm really concerned about how that reinforces so much of the shame that we actually feel, the deep shame that we feel, the fear of inadequacy, and how some of this, I don't know if you want to call it like red pill sort of content, actually just makes it worse. You don't see it because it's giving you this illusion of power, and you think it gives you agency over people and helps you feel for a brief moment like you are big, that you are strong, and it's just not the way. Because it also means that you must give up parts of your humanity in order to be those things, and that will not take you very far. It certainly won't be a healthy path. And so I hope that anyone who comes across my work, your work, will, the sort of things that we're trying to do, understand that there's so much more to life than those like quick messages about who men are, what we're supposed to look like, what we're supposed to do, who we're supposed to date, how that's supposed to happen. There's so much more to us than that, and we can create space and honor all of that by having more conversations like this. But yeah, and if people want to keep up with me, I'm on most socials. Not very active because, frankly, can't be bothered. It's just like a lot to keep up with. I do my best, but certainly on Instagram at Jor-El Caraballo. So it's just my name, and most platforms I'm listed on that way. And I write a newsletter a couple times a month called Coffee and Contemplation, which is also linked on my Instagram, which is it's on Substack. And so be glad to have anyone a part of the conversation there too.
Well, I have to say it's been a pleasure to talk with you. I really enjoyed it. I got a lot of smiles out of this conversation. Got some food for thought. And yeah, you're just a very bright, bright dude. And I apologize about being distracted. My puppy keeps messing with my other puppy. And I'm just like, stop it.
I thought I
But
saw a little fluff a little while ago, and I was like, wait, who is that?
oh, so
I
his
love
name
it.
is actually the white dog, his name is Zeno, he's pre-Socratic philosopher, and then the other one is Copper from the Fox and the Hound.
Right.
But I wanna say I appreciated the conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. We should do this again sometime.